As a washed up CSGO player, I've only been able to solo queue to Diamond 3 this season in Valorant, which honestly was still pretty hard for me. Now, while I may not be a professional player, or even as good as some of you Radiants flexing in the YouTube comments, I'm just better! I have played and placed in Valorant's competitive matchmaking system in every season so far, so I do at least have a decent amount of experience playing this game. With that being said, take any advice in this video with a heavy grain of salt. Keep in mind that all of the following is just my opinion, but hopefully you find some of it informative, or at least entertaining. So, in previous acts of Valorant, the Bulldog always seemed to be one of those seldomly purchased weapons, as generally eco and anti-eco rounds were dominated by frenzies, specters, and judges respectively. That, and even on force buy rounds, it was just as, if not more common, to see Spectre full armor purchased over the Bulldog. But ever since patch 3.0 released, a lot of aspects in Valorant's competitive matchmaking meta have seemingly changed. Mainly due to the fact that utility prices were increased across the board, and running inaccuracy/pellet damage was subsequently nerfed, affecting most guns but especially hurting the Spectre and the Judge. Now, while we did see many weapons also receive price reductions to help mitigate the sweeping increase in utility expenses, the only weapon that actually received an increase in weapon statistics was, surprisingly, the Bulldog. On that note, before we get into the bulk of this meta discussion, let's take a quick look at some notable weapon statistics to better give context to my thoughts and opinions later on. So, for the now discounted price of $2,050, the Bulldog sports an increased fire rate of 9.5 rounds per second, with a spread of 0.3 for both hip firing and aiming down the sights. As for damage values, the Bulldog hits for 115 damage per headshot, 35 damage per body shot, and 29 damage per leg shot. When comparing its overall stats to the Vandal or Phantom, we can see that the Bulldog really isn't that much worse than either primary rifle, only having a 0.25 slower fire rate than the Vandal, a 0.05 difference in hipfire spread, and strangely enough, one less bullet per magazine. On the other hand, while the Phantom does contain a noticeably faster fire rate and tighter spread, it also has a noticeable drop in damage when firing over 30 meters, dropping its damage values to comparative levels with the Bulldog at range. Like the Vandal, the Bulldog does not suffer from damage falloff under 50 meters. Which isn't bad considering the Bulldog is $850 cheaper than either primary rifle. As a side note, I won't be comparing the Bulldog's ADS spread and fire rate with either of the primary rifle's ADS statistics. This is because, in Valorant, you're more likely better off AD-AD hip firing with either primary rifle, except for maybe at extreme ranges, or in rare situations where you actually need to ADS. With that being said, unlike the Vandal or Phantom, one of the Bulldog's most important features lies within its ADS capabilities. That being its ability to fire a compact 3-round burst while aiming down its sights. Now, this burst mode comes with a 76% reduction in move speed and 66% reduction in firing speed, which may sound bad on paper, but that's actually not the case, as the latter actually helps with controlling the burst fire spread, leading us into our next discussion. So, how should you use the Bulldog? Use the burst mode.
Yeah, we'll be sure to check it out. Thanks.
It's good. Seriously though, all jokes aside, unlike the FAMAS in CSGO, the burst mode on the Bulldog is honestly really good, as its 3-round spread holds fairly tight and consistent even when fired at longer ranges. This means that you only need one well-placed burst to physically delete a fully armored opponent. Plus, even if you don't destroy them with one single burst, because of its 66% reduced fire rate, burst firing is easily controllable, allowing you to pretty much get away with spamming mouse 1 without having to worry about significant weapon inaccuracy or sway. Well, that is to say, so long as you're not trying to burst fire while moving. As previously mentioned, with its 76% move speed reduction, I can't really suggest trying to burst fire with the Bulldog while simultaneously AD-AD strafing, as the move speed reduction really makes things rather difficult. That's not to say that you can't or shouldn't when peeking in and out of corners, but for most situations you're better off crouching and committing to a duel, especially when out in the open. Strangely enough, the Bulldog may be one of the few weapons in Valorant that is better used while crouching and ADSing. Crazy, I know, considering the accepted shooting meta as of late has been AD-AD strafing while hip firing, since spray patterns in Valorant are randomized after the 6th or 8th bullet or so. Still, even at higher ranks, you're gonna be crouching and spraying at close to medium ranges. And honestly, it shouldn't be that difficult to mentally shift gears when burst firing with the Bulldog, considering how rare it is to AD-AD strafe shoot while ADSing practically any weapon in Valorant. On the flip side, while the Bulldog is certainly serviceable when hip firing at close to even medium ranges, you're most likely going to be outgunned by Vandals and Phantoms if you try to straight up AD-AD hip fire duel them. So for the most part, I try to only hip fire at close to medium close ranges, while sticking with the ADS burst at medium long to long ranges. In my opinion, the secret to the Bulldog's success against most weapons is to try to stretch the map and take ranged aim duels where you can comfortably crouch and shoot. I found this strategy to be particularly useful on maps like Breeze, that have huge open areas that force players into said ranged aim duels. But there are plenty of other spots on other maps to abuse this tactic as well. With that being said, because of the Bulldog's accuracy while bursting and 0 damage drop off under 50 meters, I do believe it to be one of the most effective anchor weapons when holding almost anything at range, especially for the price and ease of use. Now, while many of you may be shouting at your screens stating that the Guardian is infinitely better at this, which, sure, in some circumstances, due to its one-shot lethality, it may be, I still consider the Bulldog to be a better choice overall due to the simple fact that you can full auto spray when dealing with targets at closer ranges. Of course, all of these tips are circumstantial, as how you should use the Bulldog heavily depends on what round you're using it on, in addition to whether you're playing attack or defense, among other things. So, with that being said, when should you buy a Bulldog? Ideally, if you're comfortable using the Bulldog, you should buy it whenever you feel like it. But more specifically, I think the Bulldog is an excellent choice for anti-eco or anti-save rounds. With the increased price of utility and nerfs to the Spectre and Judge, it's usually better to have at least 1 or 2 Bulldogs on your team to cover range, rather than the 5-man Spectre full armor meta that was popular in previous patches. Now, unfortunately, because the Bulldog is still $2,050 instead of $2,000, you may not be able to afford a Bulldog with full armor right after winning Pistol. That, and with a second round Bulldog buy, you most likely won't be able to purchase your full utility kit. Of course, while utility does play a huge role in Valorant as a whole, I would argue that it's more important to have stronger ranged weapons when playing against save and eco rounds, especially when defending. While Spectre full armor remains a solid anti-eco, anti-save option, you're most likely forcing engagements in CQC, where common eco and save weapons like the Frenzy, Shorty, Spectre, etc. can easily ruin your day. So purchasing a Bulldog can help stretch your firing range and thus widens your options of engagement. With that being said, I don't advise people purchase a primary rifle right after winning Pistol, mainly because you're rarely going to have enough money to purchase one with full armor. That, and even if you do, dropping a Phantom or Vandal to the enemy team is more than enough to turn the tide of a round. On the flip side, dropping a Bulldog, while still bad, isn't that much worse than dropping a Spectre, considering that most people are very familiar with how to use a Spectre effectively, but not so much with the Bulldog. Besides that, probably the biggest reason to buy a Bulldog after winning Pistol is to have an actual rifle to carry over into round 3. Now, because you only receive $3,000 after winning rounds, with all weapons carrying the same kill reward of $200, it's fairly uncommon to see teams that win the first 2 rounds upgrade to a primary rifle on the third. With the cost of rebuying shields and utility to factor in, it's customary to bonus with whatever weapon you saved in the previous round. This is why I prefer buying a Bulldog over the Spectre on second round buys. Spectre carryovers usually force you to play fast to force engagements in CQC, which most teams will be expecting, and because they saved the previous 2 rounds, they will attempt to press their ranged advantage with fully bought primary rifles. However, with the Bulldog carried over, you open up the option of engaging effectively at longer ranges, while also having a decent weapon to use in CQC should you need it, greatly increasing your chances of winning the dreaded 3rd round bonus. Of course, besides anti-eco and anti-save rounds, I do believe the Bulldog to be a great weapon to use on force buy or even full buy rounds. Again, with the increased cost of utility, now more than ever, you're sometimes forced to choose between buying a primary rifle with full armor or full utility with half armor. I've noticed this especially for agents like Viper and Killjoy, who are pretty much forced to use their entire kit each and every round, especially on defense. But even if you're not playing a Sentinel or Controller, I would still recommend buying the Bulldog on duelists, because having full utility and full armor on buy rounds can make all the difference against an equal enemy economy. Plus, at the end of the day, you can always drop your Bulldog to pick up a primary rifle, helping you build up a stronger bank, which is always a good thing considering how often people ask for drops. So, in conclusion, as of now, the Bulldog is still a criminally underrated and underused weapon. With its solid weapon statistics for hip firing and amazingly accurate 3-round burst, the Bulldog can cover firefights at any range, but is especially deadly when ADSing at longer ranges. In addition, with its decrease in price and the increase of overall utility costs, the Bulldog should cement itself as the premier rifle to use on anti-eco or anti-save rounds, as the Spectre and Judge have consequently been nerfed. It's just a shame that many people seem to view the Bulldog as just a lesser Vandal, not realizing how truly terrifying the burst fire can be at medium to long ranges. Still, it's understandable considering the current strafing and hip firing meta. Hopefully, as time progresses, more people will begin to experiment with Bulldog buys, discovering and perfecting usage of its incredible burst fire mode. But at the end of the day, all of this is just my advice. Look, I've not intended this breakdown to be a set formula to be used rigidly, simply because there are so many differing factors that contribute, making every competitive game different. That, and because Riot actually seems to care about Valorant's competitive meta, or at least more than some other competitive FPS games I've played, weapon and utility statistics are constantly being tweaked and balanced. So what may be considered meta now could be considered trash in the near future. Other than that, I'm sure I've missed some aspects having to do with the competitive nature regarding the Bulldog. So let me know what you think in the comments below.
Wait a minute, this isn't even CSGO. Unliked and unsubscribed.
So, should the Bulldog really be nothing more than an afterthought? Or is it truly the most promising rifle of the new meta?